What? That's the question millions of Filipinos were asking on Tuesday evening, September 30th, 2025, at exactly 9:59 p.m. in the central Visayas region of the Philippines. A 6.9 magnitude earthquake tore through daily life, striking just off the coast of Bogo City, Cebu province. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments, and I will give you a heart. And within seconds, what had been a normal night turned into chaos. Due to the quake's shallow focus and wide reach, the tremor wasn't just felt in Cebu. It violently shook neighboring provinces, including Leyte, Samar, and Negros Oriental, plunging hundreds of thousands of families into panic. Historical landmarks crumbled, schools shuttered, and everyday life came to a grinding halt. To understand why this earthquake caused so much fear, we need to break down the science. According to the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, PHI, Volcs, the epicenter was located approximately 17 kilometers northeast of Bogo City at a depth of only 10 kilometers. That shallow depth is the key. You see, shallow quakes transfer more of their raw force directly to the surface, making them far more destructive than deeper ones. The ground shook with violent intensity, leaving residents with seconds, sometimes less, to respond. In Cebu City, the Philippines' second largest urban center, buildings swayed alarmingly. Office workers scrambled under desks, families huddled together in fear as objects fell from shelves. In some neighborhoods, power flickered, plunging streets into temporary darkness. For many, it wasn't just the physical shaking that shook them, it was the memories. The Philippines has lived through deadly earthquakes before, and each new tremor reawakens old scars. But the quake didn't just strike modern life, it attacked the Philippines' heritage too. Northern Cebu is home to some of the country's oldest religious and historical structures. In Danbantayan, the centuries-old Santa Rosa de Lima Cathedral suffered partial collapse. For locals, this wasn't just stone and mortar. It was their community's soul. Generations had prayed, married, and grieved inside those walls. Watching pieces of it fall was like watching a piece of themselves shatter. On nearby Bantian Island, videos circulated of the Parroquia de San Pedro Apostol Church shaking violently. Wooden beams groaned as parishioners screamed and fled outside. Social media was instantly flooded with clips and desperate updates. A global audience watched as the Philippines once again battled with the destructive reality of its geography. But earthquakes don't just destroy buildings, they disrupt the flow of everyday life. At a caution, officials suspended classes in key cities like Lapu-Lapu and Talisay, as well as municipalities such as Minglania and Consolacion. The following morning, classrooms that should have been filled with the laughter of children stood empty, chairs stacked, lights off. For teachers and parents, the decision to cancel wasn't just about safety, it was about psychological relief. Children, already shaken from a night of fear, weren't ready to sit through lessons while aftershocks loomed. And those aftershocks? Always the invisible threat hung heavily over the region. Authorities reminded citizens that smaller quakes could follow for days, even weeks. For many residents, this warning reopened fresh wounds. They remembered the 2013 Bohol earthquake, which killed over 200 people and was followed by dozens of destructive aftershocks. Even when the ground stops moving, the fear doesn't. Every creak of a house or vibration from a passing truck can send adrenaline rushing through already exhausted bodies. The streets of Cebu that night told the story best. Families poured out of their homes barefoot, clutching children, Bibles, and whatever possessions they could grab. The elderly leaned on younger relatives for support. Mothers tried to calm crying babies, while fathers scanned the streets, eyes darting to see if more walls would fall. The fear wasn't just personal, it was collective. Entire neighborhoods sat together under open skies, unwilling to return indoors. The air was filled with murmurs of prayers, radios buzzing with updates, and phones lighting up with frantic messages to loved ones. Are you safe? Where are you? The tremor's intensity varied depending on where you stood. In Cebu City and parts of Leyte, the quake registered an intensity VI, powerful enough to make even solid buildings sway and send unsecured furniture crashing down. In San Fernando, Cebu, residents felt an intensity 3, strong enough to be noticed but less destructive. As far away as Northern Samar, the quake registered intensity 2, a light shaking felt mainly by those who were already still. International agencies also confirmed the severity. The German Research Center for Geosciences, GFZ, logged the quake at 6.9 magnitude with the same shallow depth of 10 kilometers. That consistency in global seismic reporting only amplified the sense of alarm. The Philippines wasn't exaggerating. This was the real thing, and it was dangerous. For many residents of Cebu and surrounding provinces, sleep became impossible. Every aftershock, every unfamiliar sound in the night felt like the start of another disaster. Anxiety mixed with exhaustion. Some families camped outside their homes, too fearful to sleep under roofs that might collapse. Parents whispered reassurances to their children, even though they themselves were terrified. The earthquake of September 3rd, 2025 was more than a geological event. It was a psychological one. It tore through history, shook faith, disrupted education, and reignited the deep trauma of living in one of the world's most disaster-prone regions. And yet, even in fear, there were signs of resilience. Community members helped each other. Young men carried the elderly to safety. Neighbors shared water, flashlights, and blankets. On social media, strangers offered words of solidarity. Stay strong, Cebu. Prayers for the Visayas. The spirit of bayanahan, the Filipino value of communal unity, surfaced in the darkness, proving once again that while earthquakes can break buildings, they cannot break the Filipino spirit. Before we continue, if you're watching this and you've ever lived through an earthquake, type strong in the comments, because surviving is not just luck, it's strength. But if you think this was just about collapsed churches and shaken cities, wait until you see what happened the next morning when panic gave way to uncertainty and the true human cost of this disaster began to emerge. The morning of October 1, 2025 looked nothing like a normal Wednesday in Cebu. Schools that should have been filled with noise and laughter were silent. Streets that usually bustled with jeepneys and tricycles were instead crowded with families carrying plastic bags of belongings, blankets, and food. Some wore masks, not for health, but to shield themselves from the clouds of dust still rising from cracked buildings and collapsed churches. The Philippine government immediately announced class suspensions in major cities like Lapu-Lapu, Talisay, and Mandaue, extending into the municipalities of Minglania and Consolacion. These were not precautionary measures taken lightly. They were urgent actions to keep children and teachers safe from buildings that might not withstand another tremor. Parents who had feared sending their children to school after a night of aftershocks now felt both relief and dread. Relief that their kids were safe, but dread because life had suddenly stopped. For families who rely on daily wages, this disruption was crippling. No school meant children stayed home, but it also meant parents couldn't go to work. A mother from Consolacion described it in heartbreaking simplicity. If I leave to work and another quake comes, who will save my children? This was the reality for thousands, wages gone, because the priority was safety. But what truly defined that morning wasn't just fear, it was exhaustion. Families who had spent the night in the open air returned cautiously to their homes to assess the damage. Some found cracked walls, broken glass, toppled furniture. Others discovered far worse, gaping fractures in the foundation, rendering their homes unsafe to return to. For the poorest families, this wasn't just property damage, it was the loss of everything they had built over decades. In Bantayan, community members stood before the Santa Rosa de Lima Cathedral staring at the partial collapse. Elderly women wept openly. Fathers tried to explain to their children why the church they had baptized them in now looked broken and hollow. Religious leaders called it not just structural damage, but a wound in the heart of the community. Meanwhile, in Bantayan Island, videos of the Parroquia de San Pedro Apostol Church shaking during the earthquake continued to spread online. By morning, these images had gone viral globally, symbolizing the fragility of the Philippines' cultural heritage. International observers began asking, how many centuries-old structures would survive in a country destined to face endless quakes? But while buildings could be repaired, the human impact was harder to mend. The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, PHIX, issued warnings that aftershocks were not only possible, but highly likely. For families, this meant every second was a gamble. A father in Cebu City described it. We stand inside for food or water, and we jump outside again when the floor shakes. It feels like the ground is never safe anymore. Hospitals in Cebu began filling with patients, not just with physical injuries like cuts, bruises, and fractures, but also with anxiety attacks. Children trembled uncontrollably, unable to sleep or eat. Elderly residents with heart conditions suffered palpitations from the stress. Psychologists on the ground confirmed what Filipinos already knew in their hearts. Earthquakes wound not just the body, but the mind. The intensity levels measured across the region told a story of widespread trauma. In Cebu City and parts of Leyte, intensity Z meant violent shaking that disrupted life everywhere. In San Fernando, people reported intensity 3 strong enough to rattle nerves. Even in Northern Samar, where the quake was just intensity 2, people panicked because they knew what such tremors could lead to. When you live in a nation sitting on the Pacific Ring of Fire, every quake feels like a prelude to the next catastrophe. International seismic agencies confirmed what Powal Kess had already said. The German Research Center for Geosciences, GFZ, reported the quake at 6.9 magnitude, shallow at 10 kilometers deep. Scientists agreed the shallower the quake, the stronger the impact. That's why this wasn't just felt in Bogo City, it rippled across provinces like a stone tossed into water. For the people of Cebu, however, scientific confirmation did little to ease the fear. They didn't need numbers to tell them what they already felt in their bones. This earthquake was a reminder of their fragility. On social media, heartbreaking posts emerged. A teenager in Lapu-Lapu wrote, "I grabbed my little sister and we ran. She cried, asking if the sky was falling. I didn't know what to answer." A mother in Mandaoy shared a photo of her cracked home with the caption, "We have nowhere else to go. Please, Lord, protect us." What made this worse was the memory of past disasters. Filipinos hadn't forgotten the 2013 Bohol earthquake or the 1990 Luzon earthquake, both of which killed hundreds and displaced thousands. Each new tremor isn't just a new disaster, it's a reopening of old wounds. People don't just live through one earthquake in the Philippines, they carry all of them, like scars that never fully heal. But amidst fear, once again, resilience showed itself. Community kitchens popped up, neighbors shared rice and canned goods, and local volunteers cleared debris from streets. Teachers, though schools were closed, gathered children in makeshift shelters to read stories and distract them from the constant fear. The world watched in real time as the Philippines displayed its defining strength, Bayanihanhan, the collective unity and compassion that binds Filipinos even in disaster. But the question remained, would Bayanihan be enough when aftershocks continued to loom and families were left homeless, jobless, and traumatized? Before we continue, if you believe resilience alone isn't enough and that the world must do more to support disaster-prone nations like the Philippines, type support in the comments because survival shouldn't depend only on the strength of the people. It should also depend on the strength of the world standing with them. But as the day unfolded, a deeper realization set in. This wasn't just about buildings or schools. It was about the psychological scars that the quake left behind. Scars that might take years, not days, to heal. As the sun set on October 1st, the people of Cebu, Leyte, and Samar were still wide awake. Not because they wanted to be, but because they couldn't sleep. Every vibration, every faint sound, every gust of wind against the windows was enough to send hearts racing. The earthquake may have lasted only seconds, but its echo lingered in the minds of millions. Experts from Fivolix and the German Research Center for Geosciences, GFZ, warned that the tremor's shallow depth of just 10 kilometers meant aftershocks would be common and unpredictable. They urged residents to stay alert and prepare for additional quakes. But for those who had already lost homes, churches, and peace of mind, the question was no longer when the ground would shake again, it was how much more they could endure. Emergency shelters were overflowing. School gyms, community halls, and even churchyards turned into evacuation centers. Mothers laid blankets on cold floors, trying to make their children feel safe. Elderly residents sat silently, clutching rosaries, whispering prayers through trembling lips. Volunteers distributed relief packs, but food and water weren't the only needs. People craved reassurance, stability, and hope. Government officials announced early recovery efforts, promising rapid damage assessments and safety inspections. Engineers fanned out across Cebu, examining cracked bridges, government buildings, and schools. The Department of Education, DP, confirmed that at least 1/3 of schools in the affected area needed structural reinforcement before students could return. Meanwhile, local leaders urged the national government to accelerate disaster response funding, warning that many communities couldn't afford to rebuild on their own. And yet, even amid all the urgency, bureaucracy moved slowly. For families who had already lost everything, waiting for paperwork and inspections felt like a cruel delay. In Danbantayan, residents gathered around what was left of the Santa Rosa de Lima Cathedral, lighting candles and singing hymns among the rubble. Their faith remained unshaken even when their sanctuary had fallen. One elderly woman said tearfully to a local reporter, "We've survived typhoons, floods, and wars. God saved us again tonight. Buildings can be rebuilt, but faith stayed." Meanwhile, scientists analyze what made this quake so devastating. According to Fivolks, the fault line near Bogo City had been under silent stress for years. The sudden release of energy produced a ripple effect across multiple provinces. This wasn't random. It was part of a long pattern of seismic activity tied to the Philippine fault zone, one of the most active in the world. Every major earthquake reminds the nation of its position along the Pacific Ring of Fire, where tectonic plates constantly grind and shift beneath the surface. For geologists, it's fascinating science, but for the Filipino people, it's a lifelong sentence, a reality they must live with every day. Earthquakes are not if events in the Philippines, they're when. The government's challenge now is to turn each tragedy into a lesson. Experts called for stricter building codes, mandatory earthquake drills, and faster emergency communication systems. The Cebu quake revealed glaring weaknesses, outdated infrastructure, limited public awareness, and an urgent need for local governments to strengthen disaster preparedness programs. But perhaps the hardest lesson wasn't about science or policy, it was about psychology. Communities across the Visayas are now dealing with collective trauma. Psychologists call it anticipatory anxiety, the constant, exhausting fear of another disaster. For many children, even a passing truck now feels like an earthquake. Parents report nightmares, panic attacks, and emotional withdrawal. The Philippine Mental Health Association has already mobilized trauma counselors to affected areas. They remind the public that healing is not just physical reconstruction, it's mental reconstruction too. Filipinos are strong, yes, but even strength needs care, compassion, and time. International aid began trickling in within 48 hours. Japan, South Korea, and the United States offered technical and humanitarian support. Relief organizations from Europe sent funds for rebuilding schools and churches. But as always, much of the early relief came not from governments, but from Filipinos themselves. OFWs abroad raised money through fund drives. Local businesses donated food and bottled water. Even small sari-sari stores offered free coffee to rescuers and volunteers. This is what makes the Philippines remarkable. In every tragedy, you see both destruction and devotion, pain and compassion, loss and solidarity. But here's the uncomfortable truth. While resilience is admirable, it's not enough. The Philippines cannot afford to keep rebuilding from scratch every time nature strikes. The people deserve not only admiration for surviving, but action from those in power to prevent needless suffering. By the end of the first week after the quake, aftershocks had lessened, but the fear still hadn't faded. Many families refused to return to their homes, sleeping outdoors under tarps. Children drew pictures in the dirt of houses standing tall again, while their parents quietly wondered how long it would take to make that dream real. Social media remained flooded with messages from across the world. Stay strong, Cebu. Pray for the Philippines, we're with you. Those words mattered. They reminded survivors that they weren't alone, that somewhere beyond the chaos, the world was watching and caring. Still, among all the sympathy and news coverage, a haunting question echoed through the rubble. How many more times must we rebuild before we finally prepare? As the Philippines mourns and begins to heal, one thing is certain. The Cebu earthquake of 2025 will be remembered not only for its power, but for its lesson. It reminded everyone, from leaders to ordinary citizens, that preparedness saves lives and negligence kills them. This wasn't just another earthquake. It was a wake-up call, a test of endurance, and a mirror reflecting the strength and fragility of a nation that refuses to break. Because when the ground shakes in the Philippines, the world may tremble for a moment, but the Filipino people rise again and again, forever unshaken in spirit. Type broken in the comments if you believe the Filipino spirit can never be crushed. Let's honor every survivor, every rescuer, and every soul who stood tall in the face of fear.